Hello everybody, today I'm going to be talking about the Icelandic sagas. Now the Icelandic sagas are an integral part to burial rites, but I feel like a lot of the time students are a little apprehensive regarding them, maybe not confident enough to feel like they can discuss them in their exam, and I often have students tell me that their worst nightmare question is one based around the sagas. So I'm here today to tell you that you should feel really confident talking about the sagas, and hopefully by the end of the video you will feel incredibly confident should you be faced with a sagas question, because there really is so much to talk about and I guarantee you know more than you think you do. So according to Britannica, the Icelandic sagas, also sometimes referred to as family sagas, are a class of heroic prose narratives. They're a unique contribution to Western literature and a central pillar of Icelandic literature. They are notable for their realism, their controlled objective style, their powers of character delineation, and their overwhelming tragic dignity. They represent the highest development of the classical age of Icelandic saga writing. Regardless of whether the family sagas are true to history, they are true to the grim ethos of a vanished way of life. They also portray dramatic power and a laconic eloquence. So, they're tragic. They talk about a vanished way of life. They're dramatic. Sound like anything else we might know? The sagas are very much the foreground of burial rites, and Kent has used them so subtly at times but so prevalently at other times all throughout burial rites, and they form not only Agnes's view of the world, but they also allow us to see a lot of the values of the times. So depending on the question that you might get, if you were to get a question that asked how they shape Agnes's understanding of the world or how they shape Agnes as a person, you would be able to talk about all of these ideas that she gets from the sagas that we'll talk about shortly. Or if you got a question based around what the reader comes to know because of the sagas, you could talk about the same sorts of things, but you could also talk about the dialogue and the discourse with multiple characters surrounding the sagas, provide us with an understanding of a lot of the attitudes, values, and beliefs of the time. The first time that we hear about the sagas as readers comes at the very beginning of the novel in the epigraph. And what it says is, "Worst the one I loved best," which comes from one of the most famous Icelandic sagas. Now, for Kent to start the novel off with this, we instantly have this establishment of the fact that Agnes's story is going to be rooted in the notions of this saga. Also, we have to remember that Hannah Kent could have started the novel with anything. She also could have not included an epigraph, but because she has, we have to think of the fact that she made that choice. So Kent made the choice to begin this entire novel with the words, "I was worst to the one I loved best." So that obviously is so significant and so important, and we want to have a think about what that might mean and why she has made that decision. Now, being worst to the one we love best is a bit of an oxymoron, right? It's paradoxical in nature. You often would not be worst to the one you loved best. So we already have this establishment of some attitudes that are going to be prevalent throughout our entire text. When I think about the sagas in the text, the first thing I think about is the fact that Agnes had this connection with Inga, her foster mother, in which she would read the sagas to her. And I think that that is a really significant thing, because in my interpretation of that shows the connection between the two of them. And we find out later that Margaret references the sagas quite a lot as well. And Inga and Margaret are two of the strongest maternal roles for Agnes in the text. Perhaps they're two of her strongest connections that she has ever. So perhaps these sagas are showing us, or they are allowing us to see the connection between the characters, and perhaps they're grounds for this relationship building. We could see some mirroring, or perhaps a bit of a parallel between the fact that it's from Inga that Agnes learns these sagas, and with Margaret, she values them too. So perhaps that's something being established there. One of my favorite parts of the text happens on page 29, when we hear Agnes saying directly to us through Kent's use of first-person narrative viewpoint, "They don't know me. I remain quiet. I am determined to close myself to the world, to tighten my heart and hold on to what has not yet been stolen from me. I cannot let myself slip away. I will hold what I am inside. and keep my hands tight around all the things I have seen and heard and felt. The poems composed as I washed and scythed and cooked until my hands were raw. The sagas I know by heart. I am sinking, all I have left and going underwater. If I speak, it will be in bubbles of air. They will not be able to keep my words for themselves. They will see not saying that word on the internet, the madwoman, the murderess, the female dripping blood into the grass and laughing with her mouth choked with dirt. They will say Agnes and see the spider, the witch caught in the webbing of her own fateful weaving. They might see the lamb circled by ravens, bleeding for a lost mother, but they will not see me. I will not be there. So much in that section, so much. We have pretty much every single concept in the entire novel. We have belonging, we have identity, we have humanity, we have connection, we have superstition, we have literally everything. We also have every single device ever created, ever. There are metaphors, there is motif, there is symbolism, there is everything ever. But we have a mention of the sagas, and Agnes speaks to what she knows and who she is. And one of the very few things, she spends a lot of time telling us who she is not, but does not spend very much time telling us who she is. And she says, the sagas I know by heart. So straight away, we know as readers that the sagas are incredibly important to her, and they make up an integral part of her identity. Based on what we already know about the sagas, being that they are a really prevalent form of lit justice tragedy, the fact that this is what Agnes knows by heart shows us that this is at her core. The messages of the sagas taught her all that she knows. We know that she didn't have many people in her life that were stable, right? She didn't have a stable home. She was abandoned time after time, but she has these sagas, so they make up a lot of her as a person. Then on page 52, once it's shifted back into a third person perspective, we have Margaret meeting Agnes for the first time, and she's interpreting her, and we know that Margaret meets Agnes with a lot of apprehension and hesitation, and to some extent rightly so, because all Margaret knows of Agnes is that she is a convicted murderess, and Margaret has her children in the house, so she's a little uncertain about the whole thing. And Margaret thinks to herself, what kind of a woman kills men? The only murderesses Margaret had known were the women in the sagas, and even then, it was with words that they had killed men, orders given to servants to slay lovers or avenge the death of kin. Those women murdered from a distance and kept their fingers clean. But these times are not saga times, Margaret had thought. This woman is not a saga woman. She's a landless workmaid raised on a porridge of moss and poverty. Everybody knows I love that quote at the end. Porridge of moss and poverty is just so good. But Margaret is already stating that she is very familiar with these sagas. They are something that she clearly holds dear to herself because she references them in such a pinnacle moment. She's just met a murderer, or so she thinks, for the first time, and instantly she's thinking, I thought that only women in sagas killed people. But she's able to attain that these are not saga times, and this is not a saga woman. Chapter 3, when Agnes is first at Cornsa and she's getting to know her surroundings, she asks herself, do they sing hymns in the winter here? Maybe they recite the sagas instead. I prefer a story to a prayer. They whipped that from me at this farm, Cornsa, once, when I was young and fostered out to watch over the home field. The farmer Bjorn did not like that I knew the sagas better than him. You're better off keeping company with the sheep, Agnes. Books written by man, not God, are faithless friends and not for your kind. There's so much foreshadowing here, and so much, I guess, almost like hinting at Agnes's story, because at this point we don't know just how important the time that Agnes had at Cornsa previously with Bjorn and Inga was, and we don't know the context of these sagas being taught to her then. But the line, I prefer a story to a prayer, really allows us to understand Agnes's religious identity at this point, and again, just how important that the sagas are to her. We also have a really clear establishment of cultural assumptions regarding gender, that this man did not like the fact that Agnes knew the sagas better than him because she was a woman. So that's a really good example of gender and religion being established through this discussion of the sagas. Speaking of which, in chapter 6, Kent allows us to understand the dynamic between Inga and Bjorni, but also but also understand how important these sagas are to Agnes. So it says, when discussing Inga, she taught me the sagas. She'd tell me them by heart, and when Bjorn fell asleep, she'd make me recite the stories back to her. Bjorn never knew that his wife betrayed his orders for my sake, and I doubt he ever understood why his wife loved the sagas as she did. He humoured her saga stories with the air of a man humouring the unfathomable whim of a child. So again, that really shows us the cultural assumptions with gender, but particularly what we see here is Agnes learning from such a young age that her intelligence is a bad thing, and that her having this understanding of the sagas and her knowing things is not good, because she had to do it in secret and it had to be hidden from the powerful men. So she was acutely aware of this from a very young age. In chapter 8, we learn that Natan was reading the sagas to Agnes. So again, showing that these sagas formed connections within this world, and Agnes was so attached to Natan, and we can perhaps put part of that, definitely not all of it, but part of that down to they shared the sagas together as well. This is perhaps confirmed to us later in chapter 8 when Agnes refers to Natan as an extraordinary man, a saga man. So often I have students asking me, what does Agnes see in Natan? And we'll never know the answer to that question, but she sees him as being a saga man, and we know that everything Agnes has learnt about love and how to be treated has potentially come from these sagas. So for her to see him as a saga man shows us her seeing him with these rose-coloured glasses. We know that Kent has chosen to start a lot of her chapters off with historical documents and other pieces of fiction, such as poet Rose's work. But chapter 12 starts with an excerpt from the same saga that the novel begins with. And I think that's really interesting because again, it shows just how prevalent this saga is within the text. Now, important to mention is how much of Agnes's fate is because of the fact that she is an intelligent, well-read woman. And we know that when there's discussion about Siga being afforded an appeal, there's a lot of discussion around the fact that it's because she is simple, because she is dumb, and all of these other words that are used to describe her by these powerful men. But the powerful men refer to Agnes as a thinking woman and having a strong intellect. So we can see the disparity there, and perhaps the binary oppositions that are operating within the text to show us just how detrimental these stereotypes around gender, or these, probably stereotypes isn't the right word, but these expectations based on gender are for Agnes and her fate. All of those quotes in mind, we can see that the sagas formed Agnes, and they to blame for some of her values and some of her attitudes, but they also are representative of some of her strongest connections through her time. They also allow us as readers to understand the cultural assumptions of the text. Intelligence was not valued for women in 19th century Iceland. In fact, not valued is downplaying it significantly. We see just how negative the attitude was surrounding this, and that's really important for so many different concepts. So hopefully that helps you to feel a little bit more confident when it comes to the Icelandic sagas. I think that there is so much you can do with them, and I've only just touched the surface today. If we are asked to discuss the value of literacy in Iceland, or the power of language in 19th century Iceland rather, or if we're asked to look at gender in any capacity, the sagas are a great option. As always, let me know if you have any questions, and I look forward to hearing from you soon. Bye!